I sat in my own accountant's waiting room and heard through the thin wall as my cousin explained to my assistant that from now on, she'd be making all decisions for my business on behalf of the family. She had no idea I was already sitting in the next room, listening to every word. My name is Julia Bergman. I'm 38 years old, and I own a chain of 3 successful organic grocery stores in and around Leipzig, now operating under the Midwest brand back home. This is a story about how my own cousin tried to take over my business with a forged power of attorney while I was recovering from major surgery, and how that plan completely fell apart. My cousin Sandra and I grew up practically as sisters, since our mothers were twins and we lived in the same house until we were 12. But while I learned early to work hard and save, Sandra grew into someone who believed success was about having the right connections, not hard work. She studied communications, then cycled through several marketing positions, never staying anywhere longer than 2 years. I, on the other hand, opened my first small organic shop at 26, with a loan I painstakingly paid off over years. I worked 7 days a week, learned everything about sustainable agriculture, supply chain management, and customer retention. By 32, I'd opened a second location. By 36, a third. My company, Green Earth, now employed 45 people and generated annual revenue of over $4.3 million. Sandra watched my success over the years with growing envy, which she skillfully hid behind compliments. At every family gathering, she'd casually ask about investment opportunities or hint that she'd love to take on more responsibility in a growing company. I once offered her a marketing director position, out of family loyalty, but she turned it down because the salary didn't match her experience level, even though she actually had no meaningful retail experience. A year ago, I was diagnosed with a serious health condition requiring major surgery and several weeks of recovery. I urgently needed to grant someone limited power of attorney to handle certain administrative tasks during my absence, paying bills, signing supplier contracts within existing agreements, and similar ongoing business matters. I chose my longtime general manager, Mr. Keller, who'd worked with me for 8 years and had my complete trust. This power of attorney was notarized and strictly limited to specific, clearly defined tasks. What I didn't know was that Sandra had learned through my mother that I'd granted a power of attorney, but didn't know the exact details or limitations. She apparently saw this as an opportunity. During my recovery, when I was heavily medicated and only partially lucid, Sandra visited me in the hospital, supposedly out of family concern. What I found out later, during that visit, she asked me to sign several documents, which she described as simple get-well cards for the team. In my heavily medicated state, barely able to think clearly, I signed without really reading the documents. What I'd actually signed was a handwritten, supposedly legal power of attorney granting Sandra broad authority over my company far beyond what I'd officially granted Mr. Keller. However, the document was legally questionable, since it hadn't been notarized and had also been signed under circumstances that raised serious doubts about my legal capacity at the time of signing something Sandra had apparently not considered. 2 weeks later, while I was still at home recovering but already thinking clearly again, I got a worried call from my assistant, Miss Novak. She reported that a woman who'd introduced herself as an authorized family representative had shown up at the main office and was trying to gain access to the financial records, claiming she now had the authority to make strategic decisions for the company. I was confused at first, since I didn't remember granting any such power of attorney, aside from the limited one I'd given Mr. Keller. I asked Miss Novak to stall the person for the moment and photograph any documents she presented. When I saw the photos, I immediately recognized my own signature on a document whose exact contents I couldn't recall at all. I immediately called my lawyer, Dr. Feldkamp, who examined the document and explained it was legally highly questionable for several reasons. It hadn't been notarized. The exact circumstances of signing during a hospital stay under heavy medication raised serious doubts about my legal capacity at the time, and it also directly contradicted the already existing notarized power of attorney I'd granted Mr. Keller. I had the document immediately challenged both medically and legally. My treating physician confirmed in writing that at the time of the alleged signing, due to the medication, I would not have been capable of understanding the full scope of such a document or giving valid consent. I decided not to let the situation escalate immediately, but instead to first gather more information before acting. I asked Miss Novak to invite Sandra to a meeting at my office. Under the pretext of clarifying administrative details, I myself would wait in the next room and listen through an open connecting door. Before stepping in at the right moment, on the agreed day, Sandra arrived at the office confidently and began giving Miss Novak instructions on how she would from now on behalf of the family, make certain decisions, including a planned restructuring of management that suspiciously looked designed to push Mr. Keller out of his position so she could take on more control herself. At that moment, I walked into the room. Sandra's face went pale instantly. "Julia, you're already back on your feet," she stammered. "Evidently," I answered calmly. "Long enough to hear you explaining to my assistant that you're now making decisions for my company." Sandra immediately tried to explain herself, claiming she just wanted to help while I was sick, and that she only wanted to use the power of attorney I'd voluntarily signed to take the burden off me. "I signed something in the hospital, heavily medicated, that you presented to me as a get-well card," I said firmly. "My doctor has confirmed in writing that I lacked legal capacity at that time. That so-called power of attorney is void, and you knew exactly what you were doing when you handed it to me to sign." Sandra denied everything at first, but I already had copies of the photos Miss Novak had taken, as well as the written medical confirmation of my legal incapacity during the hospital stay. I laid both documents on the table in front of Sandra. "My lawyer is already informed," I continued. "If you try to use this document in any way, I will pursue legal action for attempted fraud and exploitation of a legally incapacitated person. Those are serious offenses, Sandra." Sandra finally broke down and admitted that she had indeed intended to exploit my weakened state to secure herself a paid executive position in my company. Motivated by her own years of failed career attempts and her growing envy of my success, I informed my entire family about the situation, including my mother and Sandra's mother, my aunt. The reactions were mixed. While my mother was deeply shocked and supportive, Sandra's mother initially tried to downplay the matter as a misunderstanding, which put considerable strain on trust between our branches of the family. I decided not to press criminal charges, mainly out of consideration for my aunt, but demanded that Sandra confirm in writing that the document was void and that she would make no further claims against my company. She signed, with noticeably less confidence than during her original attempt. In the months that followed, Sandra largely withdrew from family life, clearly ashamed of what had happened. Mr. Keller kept his position, and his trust in me was only strengthened by this incident. Having witnessed the determination with which I acted to protect my company, Green Earth opened a 4th location this year. Since then, I've implemented stricter processes to make sure no documents are ever signed again without a full legal review, regardless of the circumstances. This experience taught me that trust must be earned, and that sometimes the people who seem closest to us are the least hesitant to exploit that closeness when the opportunity arises.